Hello and welcome to ChinnyVision. This time, instant loading for your MSX. As viewers to the channel will be aware, I recently acquired an MSX2. I also have a Hitbit 75B and the Sanyo that we reviewed. In fact, all three are featured on the channel. This MSX2 has become my system of choice for MSX games. The problem is, when I review games for ChinnyVision, the only way to get games onto any of these machines is to load them in via the cassette port, either using the original tape or running a cassette lead from a PC and converting cassette images to WAV files and then playing them in, which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't, and can get deeply frustrating. I've had a few multi-format reviews that I've either had to not look at the MSX version or abandon the review altogether to come back to it another time because I couldn't load the game. So I started looking around for options for cartridges for SD cards interfaces for my MSX. And really there's one that I was looking at for a while. There's my iPad there from the MSX cartridge shop. But to get a RAM expansion, which you need to run a disk operating system or an SD card interface, and the interface was looking at $139, which really was a bit beyond the budget that I was hoping to pay. And even the cheapest option with no RAM was $99. Again, and that would be no use, basically, because you need extra RAM. You need more than the 128K RAM to run an SD card operating system and load in all those large cartridge games and everything else you need to do. So I was a bit reluctant to spend that kind of money. And then I saw this at 8-Bit Forever, the SD512, which was just €69. And it comes with the 512K RAM, two SD card slots, one big normal size and one miniature one. And it turns up in a box like this. When you order it, it comes across from Holland. Takes a couple of weeks to get there. I think he builds these to order. And, well, it looks like this. And that's basically a standard MSX cartridge, isn't it? With a semi-translucent case with two switches on the top there. One of these switches the RAM in and out, and one of them switches in the type of emulation, whether it's going to load it into the Mega ROM or whether it's going to load it into the mapping thing. Basically, it's whether you want to have 512K RAM on your system or use that 512K RAM as a cartridge. So you just, if you're loading cartridge games, you flip the thing one way. If you're just loading normal games, then you flip it the other, and the other switch turns the entire thing on and off. A little bit complicated for non-MSX users like me, well, not non-MSX, but MSX newbies. But you soon get the hang of it. The cartridge is fairly solid, nicely built. Got a little window in the back there just to see stuff and see where your card goes. You have to, it formats to FAT16. So you have to use 1 gig, 2 gig or smaller cards, basically. So that's a little bit of a gotcha. Get yourself a small card. Not clicky, unfortunately. Just slots in. Both of them just slot in like that. Shame. Cost-cutting thing. I think we looked at this before. It's about 50p extra to have a proper clicky slot on there. But what do you do? That's all they've got. So, got to live with it. And it simply slots into a cartridge on your MSX like yay. There you go. And you turn your MSX on, and in the case of this MSX2, you have to hold down the graph key in order to boot to the cartridge. Otherwise, this goes into some weird Sony databank system that we've looked at in the MSX2 Hitbit review. But and that you hold it down, it will go through to the interface. So to take the official blurb off the website, the SD512 interface allows your MSX to use up to 2 SD cards. That gives you up to 4 gigabytes, 2 gigabytes each, presumably. As a mass storage device, it can accommodate 1 full SD card and a micro SD card. 512K RAM on board, which can be used as a memory mapper, i.e. a RAM expansion, or a Mega RAM, which loads you in ROM games. The cartridge uses the Nextdoor kernel to access the storage media. It supports FAT12 and FAT16 partitions. Again, that's important because you can't just whack a 32 gig card in there because you want me to format it to FAT12 or FAT16. I tried, and if anyone knows of a way of doing that, but I ended up having to use a 1 gig card, which is more than enough. It is compatible with all MSX models. Machines with less than 128K will need the 512K onboard RAM active and the mapper feature selected. Otherwise, the interface will work in MSX-DOS 1 mode with limited functionality. Again, so perhaps that 512K memory isn't essential for 128K machines, but it's still nice to have. And this cartridge is not compatible with the Mitsubishi MLG1 and Sanyo MPC100 machine. Is mine a Sanyo MPC100? It's in its box, so I don't know. And yeah, it works pretty well, but let's go and have a look and see it running. So I've put the cartridge into the MSX and let's see how it goes. So the familiar MSX logo loads up and running. I've got a whole 128K of video memory. I'm holding down the graph key because this hit bit requires that, and the Nextdoor system, Nextdoor sys version 2.10 starts to load. I will skip it back and forth between versions on this video because I've been trying out different versions. I've recorded this part of the video over several weeks. So we're going to try and load a ROM file, Punchy. This wouldn't have been ROM originally, but it's been converted to ROM for our convenience, and it seems to run perfectly. And so far what I've found is where games have been converted to ROM, they're pretty pain-free to run. As per Chiller here, that runs perfectly well as well, and that was of course originally a tape game. But if you do have a ROM version available, then load it up because you can be pretty much guaranteed it will work. But of course this cartridge has more tricks up its sleeves than just loading from ROM. And it's not just little budget games taking up about 32K that you can load up as well. You can load up larger ROM, some games that originally came out on ROM, or some large games that have been converted to ROM as well. So we're going to try and load up Fantasy Zone 1, and you get lots of options. You can adjust your video display frequency and things like that as well in the settings, but we're just going to leave this alone because trying to include 60Hz video footage in ChinnyVision is a world of pain. But suffice to say, you can run your MSX in 60Hz. And Fantasy 1 loads up perfectly well. It's a MSX1 game. And it's one of those examples of a cartridge you probably won't have seen in the UK. Or, well, you would have played it on your Master System, but you won't have seen it on the MSX. And this is the wonderful thing about this cartridge. You can load up all those Japanese games or rare games that you've got no hope of owning physical copies of. Or if you do, well, they're going to cost a fortune, including shipping them over to the UK. And you can experience them just by playing with an SD card. And of course Konami were stalwarts of the MSX, and here is the Maze of Galius, a game I haven't heard of. I think it's Nightmare 2. Nightmare was a big game on the MSX. It looks like some kind of RPG. MSX users will be screaming at the screen at the moment, but honestly I've got no idea what this is. But it is just an example of these games that you can explore. This looks like an MSX1 game from the graphics, but a step up from what you can get on tape. Let's try an MSX2 game on ROM, and this is Nemesis 3, The Eve of Destruction. And the sound is going to be dodgy on this because the actual cartridge has an extra sound chip on board, but hopefully the game should run perfectly well. And off we go, the familiar Nemesis gameplay. Stuttering, is it stuttering a little bit? It is stuttering a little bit, it's having a few problems. Of course you are emulating a ROM cartridge, so if the SD card cartridge isn't responding in exactly the same way, the game's going to have problems. This is getting pretty horrible now, it's just slowing down. And we've stopped completely. And the machine's reset, so yeah, that game didn't work properly, but Fantasy Zone 2, another MSX2 game, does. And look at these graphics. Look at this on the MSX. It's a multitude of colours here. So many colours, sometimes your character gets a little bit lost in the background, but this game, like many others, runs absolutely faultlessly. And some of these games you could run off floppy disk. You could get a floppy interface for your MSX2 and run it like that. But really, this is quick, easy, and doesn't require lots of swapping of external media. Once your MSX SD card is all loaded up, that's all you need to worry about. And as I say, I recorded these clips over several evenings, including one evening where I upgraded the firmware on my card. So you just need to bear that in mind. The card always remembers where you were the last time you used it, so it dumps you straight back into the directory you were last in. So let's unload this game. And this is, I think, Ghostbusters or Ghostbusters 2. I think Ghostbusters 2. And you get a little menu there, get some stuff up there. It doesn't support long file names. So sometimes when games got long file names, you can't tell which one's which. Many of the interfaces across lots of 8-bits have this problem. So this is Ghostbusters 2. Probably a very quick conversion from the Spectrum, I imagine. Probably intended for the Spanish market, but again, this is going to be incredibly useful for ChinnyVision for me to be able to load games up quickly rather than struggling to try and get them to load from a PC via a cassette interface. And yeah, it's a straight specky port running slower. As I say, probably intended for the Spanish and Dutch markets. And now this game, Power Drift, this loads in perfectly fine as well. Look out for Mensky and in position 2 there. One thing to be aware of, don't load too many games into each directory because it will really slow down your accessing of those directories when you're trying to scroll through them. And there's the Konami game on disc. Don't know if it was originally a ROM game that's been converted or not. It's Super Cobra. And again, runs perfectly fine. Some of the very, very large cartridges I've struggled with. Some of the half meg cartridges weren't playing ball. I don't know if that's my ineptitude or they just don't work. I don't know. The device also offers the ability to load in tape images, and we're going to try that next. So I've got a copy of The Living Daylights I reviewed a few weeks ago, and unfortunately, yeah, it doesn't load. I had a lot of trouble loading this from tape to begin with, and from SD card, all it does is this flickering thing. It just loads up, does a loading screen, then does this, and nothing happens. You can just leave your MSX for half an hour, come back, nothing will have happened. One thing I will say is I've had more success with this with the updated version of Sofa Run than I had with the version that I was using initially. So if you are having problems loading games, do try an updated version because you may find you have more success. Doesn't solve everything, but it's helped considerably. What can be frustrating is you've set your heart on running a particular game and then you find no matter what you do, it doesn't load, and that always seems to magnify the problem because at the end of the day, these devices they're not bodges. That would be to give them a disservice, but they are a not authentic way, so to speak, of running the software. They're trying to use technology to give you all that choice, and it can be a little bit difficult to always emulate some of those more exotic cartridges where there are sound chips and all sorts of things built in. That said, the impression I also get from the MSX community is that perhaps this cartridge isn't the most compatible out of the MSX cartridges available. So that's a look at the SD512, and as you can see, it's a bit of a mixed bag. When it works brilliantly. It seems to be very hit and miss, which tallies with what the guys on the MSX forums said. The suggestion was from those guys when I asked them that I should go for the more expensive cartridge, but frankly, at the price differential, you've got to ask yourself this. You're essentially looking at twice the cost for the Mega Flash ROM, which I'm told offers increased compatibility. But that's a lot of money. That €139 is, and PayPal surcharge for 5% as well, is an awful lot of money. This cartridge is €69, about half the price, and it certainly runs more than half the games. No, it's not ideal, yes, if money is no object, I would definitely go for that more expensive cartridge if it lives up to its promises. I have to say, 'cause I haven't tested it, so I don't know. So I can't thoroughly recommend the SD512, but it pretty much is the only game in town for people on limited budget.